Have you ever wondered, am I the narcissist? I have, and it wasn't very long ago, and it was the last thing I wanted to be called. It was something that made me believe was right up there with psychopath. And the irony of that is that it kept me from discovering what the real truth was that was lying underneath, which was I had a lot of childhood trauma, and I didn't understand where that trauma was coming from or what caused it, because I wasn't raised in a family that was abusive. There was no one used disparaging remarks toward me. No one beat me. No one burned me with cigarettes. And that happens to many people, and they seem to survive. They seem to do okay. And there was this underlying desperate fear within me of being seen, being vulnerable, being exposed. And it wasn't until I had a situation come up in some of my relationships that caused me to do some research online and try to make some sense of some issues that were coming up. And what I discovered was the word narcissism. And though I'd heard it before, it just didn't relate to myself or anyone that I was in a relationship with. But when I found out what was really underneath the word, what was really the characteristics of narcissism, I began to start putting pieces together. And it wasn't long before I started seeing characteristics in narcissism that I related to. And so it naturally, maybe because I'm actually not a narcissist, led me to self-reflect and ask questions, do some inner searching, even go to a therapist. And I brought it up with a therapist, and I talked to my husband about it, and talked to close family, and I was even in a program for complex childhood trauma, and I brought it up there. So I was really searching, but the issue is why were some of my characteristics so closely aligned with narcissism? So what I want to do in this video is just do some I want to demyth who narcissist was a little bit, and then take the word narcissist and narcissism and make it a little bit more understandable. Take out some of the fear around it and the stigma around it. And so let's look at the myth of narcissists, who this label, that even the personality disorder is framed after. So Narcissus was a god who was cursed by another god to stare at his reflection in the water and become obsessed with it, fall in love with the reflection, and become so obsessed that he would never leave. Of course, he could never get any return of any kind of love or affection. Of course, the image could not relate to him at all. It just was. It wasn't real. So Narcissus would gaze over the edge of the water and stare at himself, and was so obsessed that he couldn't even tear himself away to eat or do any kind of self-care, and eventually starved to death there. So I want to point out that Narcissus wasn't in love with himself. He was in love with the image of himself. And I think that that's where a lot of the confusion comes in around what exactly is a narcissist. And though I'm no expert, I don't have a psychology degree, I'm not a doctor, I'm just someone who has suffered a lot in a narcissistic family system. Not because there was anyone in my family that I would say is a narcissist, but the system itself was based on how that image was the most important thing in the family. And though I don't mean that in a sense that everything was about what do the neighbors think of us? Are we keeping up with the Joneses? It was that there was such a deep level of trauma from generations before that had not been faced, that there was a protection over shame. Anytime there's abuse, really of any kind, there tends to be a false self created that's then passed down from generation to generation to hide the vulnerabilities and the secrets of its members. So being raised in a system taught me that how other people saw me was the most important thing, and that who I was in reality wasn't safe for me to be. And so I created a false self, which was protection. This was a survival identity to keep me connected. Because in my family, though my parents were wonderful, loving people, at the root, they couldn't connect with me on a deep emotional level. So I didn't feel validated. I didn't feel mirrored. And what happens is when a child isn't mirrored or validated, they have to connect to something. And so usually what they do is they connect through a false sense of self. They figure out, it's a brilliant strategy. They figure out, how am I going to get love? How am I going to connect? And it's usually, oh, well, I need to be less of me and more, I need to continue to invest in this image that seems to make other people happy. So that being said, it was really important for me to look at narcissism through a really clear lens, a really compassionate lens, so that I could see I was indeed in a narcissistic family system based on shame and based on image and based on a protective system that keeps vulnerable parts of ourselves safe. And what that led me into was great suffering inside of me because I wasn't being myself. And so actually, I would say the key to my healing and coming out of the system, which I was completely unaware that I was in any system, was in asking myself these questions. First of all, am I a narcissist? Second of all, what does that mean? And third, I think the biggest question of all is, so what characteristics do I have that I can relate to? And then how do I begin to see the system for what it is, how the system was created, how to come out, and how to come home to myself? So if any of this speaks to your heart, subscribe, follow me. I will be taking a wild journey into narcissism, narcissistic family systems, not because I am a narcissist, but because I can learn what it is to be so self-conscious that I can hardly tear my gaze away from how do I look to other people? How can I get love? It's a very codependent system, but it goes beyond codependency. I wasn't getting the answers in the codependent studies and the books and the resources. There was something deeper, and looking into this narcissistic system is what began to really set me free, because it was so scary. And I know now why it was so intimidating for me to look. And when I looked into it, it was like looking right into the demon's face, and being able to have the courage to say, what if? And somehow that was enough to break the spell. Like Narcissus was never able to break the spell. What if he could have asked, What if you could have questioned, what's going on here? Why am I so obsessed with this image? Is it even real? So that's what we're going to do in this channel. This is about coming home to the self. So thank you for watching.